Elijah Brooks's life is the story of a powerful journey that stretches from the streets where he walked in broken shoes to becoming one of the nation's most influential social entrepreneurs. This poignant narrative, telling how a broken child managed to heal a city, reveals a struggle against poverty, prejudice, and the system, woven with determination. It is not just a story of reaching success, but of rising by lifting others along the way. If you like the video and subscribe to the channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. South Side, Chicago. A dry and sticky July morning in 2003, 13-year-old Elijah Eli Brooks shook a rusty bucket in the narrow stairwell of their apartment building while the city was still quiet. The bucket held leftover dirty soapy water from Mr. Stanton, the building janitor's workday. Eli's task was to scrub the muddy footprints in the hallway. Old Mrs. Rosenbaum, who lived upstairs, creaked her door open, watched the boy for a moment, then shrugged and shut it. Just another ordinary day. School was out for the summer, but for Eli, that meant not missing the weekly cleaning job for $40. His shoes were a cracked pair of sneakers his mother had bought from a second-hand store for $2. One of his socks had a hole at the knee. Neighborhood kids laughed and called him broken shoes. Eli would always lower his head and keep working. That morning, Marcus Big Mac Campbell and his friends stood by the front entrance, watching him mop. "Gonna make a career out of that mop, Brooks?" Marcus shouted. Their voices echoed off the apartment walls. Eli's face flushed. It felt like the water in the bucket had risen to his knees and frozen him in place. But he didn't stop. Stopping meant Mr. Stanton's threat to fire him could come true. When Eli finished and stepped outside, Lake Street's corridor of small shops was already clouded with early delivery truck exhaust. From the corner diner, Bray's Diner, the smell of toasted bread drifted into the air. Eli made a silent promise that he'd sit there one day as a paying customer, but for now he had $1.75 in his pocket, just enough for a small to-go coffee. Behind the counter, Janine handed him a paper cup and winked. "Don't forget to set goals, kid. Coffee's like dreams. If it gets too cold, it loses its taste." Eli clutched the cup with both hands and sat on the curb, thinking of the past between sips. His mother, Ruth Brooks, was a tired nurse juggling 3 jobs. His father, Calvin, had left when Eli was 6 months old, leaving behind nothing but a worn photo and an old cap that read Calvin's Auto Repairs. Ruth's only dream was to see her son land an office job, just one where he wears a clean shirt. Eli had unknowingly started forming a plan to turn that dream into his own. While scrubbing hallways, he'd glance at mailboxes at eye level, bank notices, insurance letters, credit card statements. He memorized unknown terms, APR, crime rate, overdraft, a foreign language spelling out poverty letter by letter. You couldn't dismantle a weapon you didn't understand. Eli promised himself, one day he'd speak that language fluently. That afternoon, Mr. Stanton stood in the basement with hands on hips. "You skipped 4 apartments, Brooks," he barked. Eli stammered an apology as Marcus and his friends peeked through a doorway, watching. He could feel the cold basement floor through his worn socks, and the sting of humiliation spread all the way down to his soles. Just then a black sedan pulled up outside. A well-dressed, gray-bearded man stepped out, Arthur Whitlow. Whitlow was one of the city's leading real estate investors and was about to buy the building, though Eli didn't know that. All he saw was the man's expensive watch gleaming in the sunlight. Hearing the commotion, Whitlow came down to the basement. "What's going on here?" he asked. Stanton's voice softened. Eli stood clutching his mop with both hands as Whitlow turned to him and knelt to his eye level. "What's your name, son?" "Elijah Brooks, sir." "What are you going to be when you grow up, Elijah?" The question cut through Marcus's mocking like a knife. Eli hesitated for a moment, then with a courage he didn't know he had, squared his shoulders. "I'm going to be the city's biggest businessman." His own words echoed in his ears. Marcus burst out laughing. Stanton grunted. But Whitlow just smiled. There was curiosity in his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. He reached into his pocket and handed Eli a business card. 10 years from now, my internship doors open. Remind me." The gray-bearded man's footsteps faded into the distance. The basement fell silent. Marcus didn't laugh this time. Stanton shook his head and muttered, "Foolish dreams." But in Eli's chest, something had begun to burn. The texture of that business card had sparked it. It wasn't hunger, it was passion. Eli gently set the mop down, tied the laces of his cracked sneakers. Maybe he was still broken shoes, but now he had a new title in mind. The future Mr. Whitlow. That day, a business card lost in the dust of Southside became an invisible contract. And Elijah Brooks took the first step on his 8-chapter journey to success. Chicago, 2007. Elijah Brooks was 17. Every day he quietly walked out of the concrete-plastered apartment buildings of Southside and entered through the rusty iron gates of Bronzeville Tech High School. No one knew he had stayed up until 3 a.m. watching entrepreneurship videos or had written and torn up presentation drafts over and over again. The tiredness soaked into the school's gray walls matched the quiet resistance growing inside Eli. In childhood he'd been broken shoes. Now he was Weird Eli, because what interested others were sneakers, girls, and gangs. Eli read business magazines. That year, in the first quarter, a new program was announced to all high schools in the city, the Whitlow Foundation Scholarship Competition. The moment Eli heard the name, his heart almost jumped out of his chest. It was the same man who had handed him a business card in their building's basement 4 years ago. Since that day, Eli had taped the card to the inside of his notebook cover and glanced at it every morning. He never called Whitlow, but the man's words kept echoing in his mind. 10 years from now, my internship doors open. Remind me. The competition was for low-income students in the city. To enter, they needed a business idea, a detailed presentation, and a 5-minute pitch. The grand prize: a scholarship, mentorship, a summer internship, and a one-on-one meeting with Whitlow. For Eli, this wasn't just a contest, it was a turning point. But he was stuck. He barely knew how to use PowerPoint, let alone pitch a business idea. When he sat at the library computer, surrounded by mocking stares, he froze, unable to type a single word, while gossip and laughter echoed around him. Until a hand touched his shoulder. Mr. Langston, the school's history teacher. He once dreamed of becoming a journalist, but had chosen teaching to support his family. His tie was always crooked, his glasses always slipping down his nose, and he had a way of instantly noticing potential in silence. Brooks, he said in a low voice, I think you can win this competition. But first, you need to learn how to tell your story. From that day on, Mr. Langston kept Eli after school every afternoon. Together, they stood at a whiteboard in an empty classroom, writing down ideas, erasing and rewriting. Eli's idea was simple but powerful. A social enterprise called Back to Back that collected used sneakers from low-income neighborhoods, restored them, and returned them to youth in need. At first, Langston frowned. It reflects your past, but there are no numbers. Eli sighed. That's because I haven't started yet. Langston smiled. Then start, with your imagination. For weeks, the classroom lights stayed on long after the halls emptied. Eli started drawing up financial tables, projecting user growth, and when he learned the phrase social impact, his eyes lit up. By the time the presentation was ready, his palms were sweating, but his eyes were steady. On competition day held at the Chicago Innovation Center, Eli was the only contestant not wearing a suit. Others arrived with sponsors, mentors, and families. Eli came alone. But loneliness had never been his enemy, it had been his teacher. When it was his turn, Eli stepped into the hall and locked eyes with the gray-bearded man in the front row. Arthur Whitlow sat just as he had back then, fingertips pressed together. The moment Eli took the microphone, the room went quiet. My name is Elijah Brooks. I'm the founder of Back to Back. One pair of worn shoes can carry a child's dreams. His pitch was short but powerful. No fancy words, no tearful stories. Just truth. A business born from cracked sneakers. A solution that touched a social wound. And a young man's determination. When he finished, there was a few seconds of silence. Then came rising applause that echoed in Eli's ears. Whitlow gave a slight nod. Their eyes met. There was no business card this time, because Eli wasn't receiving a card anymore. He was opening the door. When the results were announced, Eli came in third. He wasn't among the winners. But in the lobby, a man approached him. Eli didn't know him. My name's Ronald Nash. I'm the director of operations at the Whitlow Foundation. My boss wants to speak with you personally about the summer. Are you ready? Eli raised his head. Not only ready, I've been waiting for this moment for years. That summer, for the first time in his life, Elijah Brooks stepped into a real office building. He sat in rooms with white-collar professionals. And at a small desk, The idea born from worn sneakers began to attract interest from investors. Each week, Whitlow had lunch with Eli and listened. "One like you doesn't come often," he said one day. "But when they do, they spark revolutions." That summer, Eli didn't just enter the business world. He stepped into the full power of his own mind. He was no longer the boy with a mop. He was the young man with a pitch. And for the first time, he heard his own story come from the mouth of an investor. That day, Elijah Eli Brooks's walk turned into a run. Boston, Massachusetts, 2009. When Elijah Brooks stepped onto Northeastern University's campus for the first time, his eyes widened. Red brick buildings, amphitheaters framed by silver-gray columns, elegant library entrances, and confident students walking everywhere, wearing backpacks and listening to music with headphones. For a kid from Southside, it felt surreal, like entering another universe. That day, his mother Ruth Brooks wiped her tears and said just one sentence. "No matter what, Eli, I'm proud of you." Then she returned to Chicago. Eli was alone now, but he was used to that. In his first year, he was selected for a business and innovation-based design thinking program. Thanks to his back-to-back pitch and summer internship, he had been accepted as a priority student. At first, everything went well. In the early weeks, his confidence was high. But as the classes grew more complex and group projects began, Eli realized that the other students were far more equipped. They spoke differently. Some mentioned the Keynesian multiplier when talking about macroeconomics. Others referenced Apple during presentations, fluently using design terminology. In one class, for a project titled Brand Creation from Scratch Through Design Thinking, he was placed in a 4-person team. The other team members were Lucas Henley from Connecticut investor family, Samantha Cho from Seattle active in tech startups, and Priya Nair, Indian background, a star in data analytics. Eli tried to contribute to the team's ideas, but every suggestion he made was either brushed off or drowned out by more polished responses. "Eli, your idea sounds too street level," Lucas said one day. "We're talking scalable here." Eli said nothing. But in that moment, all the confidence he had built in Southside's damp basements collapsed. The project was presented during finals week. Their presentation had the company's name, logo, and marketing strategy on the screen. Though Eli's name appeared on the team list, none of his ideas were included. He only spoke one sentence. He only advanced the slides once. And in the end, the jury gave the project a low grade for lack of creativity. That night, Eli sat in his dorm room and looked at his collection of business cards. Whitlow's was still on top. Then he read a note from his mother written years ago. "When your belief in yourself wavers, remember who you are, the boy who gave up sleep to work at night but never gave up on his dream." But for the first time, Eli felt like he couldn't carry the weight of his own name. At 3 a.m. he went for a walk off campus. The streets were silent. The city lights felt cold. Ahead, he saw a cafe with light glowing from inside. He stepped in. There was only one person inside, a middle-aged black woman reading a book behind the counter. The woman looked up. "You look too tired for this hour, child." Eli couldn't find the words. She smiled. "My name's Martha. I own this cafe. Looks like there's a battle going on in your head. Tea or coffee?" "Coffee," Eli said softly. "Black." As she handed him the cup, she asked with a glance. "Let me guess, life just slapped you for the first time?" Eli paused, then nodded. "I failed." "No," Martha said. "You just met reality. Real competition, inequality, difference. This isn't failure. This is an invitation to redesign." That sentence echoed in Eli's mind, an invitation to redesign. From that day on, Eli returned to campus with a new perspective. He didn't lock himself in the library. Instead, he began to ask questions. He went to Lucas and asked, "Where did you learn data analysis?" He asked Samantha, "How did you become so fluent in presenting?" At first, they were surprised, but then they helped. For the first time, Eli stopped trying to compete. He focused on learning. And most importantly, he rebuilt his own design language. At the start of his second year, he entered a small university contest. If you have an idea, explain it in 60 seconds. When he took the stage, he had no business cards in his pocket, no team by his side. But his voice was clear. People think success is your first leap. But real success is the ability to rise again after you hit the ground. That's what I've learned. Back-to-back is no longer just a social venture. It's my rebirth. The jury chair, a woman, stood up silently. Interesting, she said. I'll be watching you. Years later, she would become one of Eli's investors. But that night, Eli walked back to campus unaware of that future. He still carried the sting of failure on his shoulders, but now it felt less like a burden and more like a medal. Because he knew. A design born from ashes rests on the strongest foundation. Chicago, 2013. When Elijah Brooks graduated from college, he wasn't carrying just a diploma. He was carrying his struggles. When he folded Northeastern's heavy parchment into his pocket, there was no smile on his face. Even at that moment, the weight of the future was clawing at his mind. His classmates had landed high-paying jobs. Some were moving abroad. But a different path had been laid for Eli. A desk, a monitor, and thousands of lines of data as an analyst intern at Whitlow and Nash Capital. On his first day entering the building, he was hit by a metallic mix of perfume and success. Gray suits, the clicking of polished heels, financial strategies unfolding behind glass panels. Eli stood out for being too plain. His clothes were neat but not expensive. His speech was clear but not flashy. And his skin was black. That detail, the difference, lingered in every elevator pause, every corridor glance. During the first few weeks, his tasks were routine, even belittling: email sorting, photocopying, setting up meeting rooms. He sat with the other interns in a windowless room on the lowest floor of the office. Among them was Bradley Kirkman, a Harvard grad from a wealthy family, confident in every move. From day one, Bradley kept his distance. "So you're from that thing?" he asked, half smirking. "From where?" "You know, that scholarship, one of the foundation kids?" Eli held eye contact and replied, "I'm from South Side. And yes, I'm here through the Whitlow scholarship." Bradley nodded. His judgment was already made. To prove himself, Eli became the only intern who stayed late into the night. He mined data in Excel sheets, read industry reports before sleeping. One night, as Whitlow came down from the executive floor, he found Eli still staring at his screen. "It's 10 p.m. Brooks. Not going home?" Eli didn't look at the screen, he looked at Whitlow. "If I stay, I'll be better prepared in the morning." Whitlow paused, then replied, "Being prepared is good. But sometimes the system ignores even the best prepared." That line echoed in Eli's chest. One day, all interns were asked to submit proposals for the firm's new market strategies session. Bradley proposed real estate investments in London. Others focused on e-commerce apps and SaaS solutions. Eli proposed something entirely different. Urban Renewal Initiative, a community-based real estate strategy for South Side. On presentation day, Eli gave a 20-minute slideshow backed with data on his neighborhood's untapped potential. He showed how repurposing abandoned buildings could bring both profit and social impact. Everything was technical, clear, and to the point. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a few investors nodded. The first to speak was Bradley. "Elijah's idea feels emotional. The data's solid, but these areas carry high risk." Whitlow remained silent. He just looked at Eli, then lowered his head. After the presentation, no one approached Eli. No congratulations. No follow-up. A week later, the promotion list was announced. Bradley was the only intern hired. As Eli packed up his desk, he ran into Whitlow in the elevator. "Your proposal was strong," Whitlow said. "But..." Eli didn't want to hear the rest. "I know. Risky. Too many walls." Whitlow nodded. "Sometimes even the smartest idea can't change how the system sees." Eli lifted his head. "Maybe it's time to think outside the system, Mr. Whitlow?" Unemployed, exhausted, and disappointed, Eli returned to Chicago's outskirts. Ruth Brooks still worked night shifts, trying to understand the emptiness in her son's eyes. One night, on a bus passing through his old neighborhood, a middle-aged man sat next to him, messy clothes, tired eyes. "Hey, you're Elijah, right?" the man asked. Eli turned. "I don't recognize you. I'm Marcus. Big Mac. From high school. Remember?" Eli didn't place him at first, then his eyes widened. "You. Oh my God." Marcus had aged. He was battling addiction, living in a shack. "So, where are you now?" Eli paused. "Nowhere, yet." Marcus lowered his head. "We never wanted you to win back then, but Deep down, we all wondered if we could ever be someone like you. That line pierced Eli's chest like a nail. The next day he visited his old school, Bronzeville Tech. Mr. Langston was still there. He smiled when he saw Eli. Don't let the world grind you down, Elijah. Remember, real success isn't about staying inside the system. It's about finding your own way out of it. That evening Eli opened a notebook in his apartment. A blank page. He wrote 3 words. Back-to-back capital. This time it wouldn't be about shoes. It would be about human potential. Not about profit, but restoration. And the seed that grew in Chicago's shadows had begun to search for its own light. Chicago, 2014. South Side was still gray. The same cracked sidewalks, the same tin sign shops, the same broken basketball hoops. But in Elijah Brooks' eyes, this scene no longer meant decay, it meant spaces waiting to be rebuilt. The darkness he was born into had become his projection light. Someone who knew the dark could see exactly where to let the light in. Back-to-back had to stop being just an idea. Eli took the first step. He joined volunteer mentorship programs like SCORE Chicago, attended meetings with local community leaders. He returned to the same buildings he once mopped, but now with a projector and presentation slides. Still, what he needed most was capital. He didn't have an office. His venture began at the back table of a Starbucks with just Wi-Fi and a notebook. And the first person to believe in him turned out to be someone unexpected. Naomi Voss. A fellow Northeastern graduate who had moved back to Chicago after finishing school, now a data scientist. She heard Eli speak at an event. After the presentation she walked up to him. I've met very few people who speak like you, she said. But I don't want to work with speakers. I want to work with doers. Eli replied without lifting his eyes. I've been doing quietly, for years. Naomi had the technical skills to complement Eli's vision. Together they updated the business model. Now, it wasn't just about refurbished shoes, it also included a microeducation network to train local youth and a digital inventory platform. Eli told the story, Naomi backed it with data. Back-to-back was preparing to build an economy from within. But they still had no funding. The first time Eli pitched to an angel investor, the air in the room was heavy. On the 32nd floor of a tower on Lakeshore Drive, the man across the table looked at him. Interesting idea. But there's no measurable return. It sounds more like a donation. Eli pointed at the chart he had prepared. Reclaimed youth are more valuable than reclaimed buildings. This investment pays off indirectly, but it lasts. The man shook his head. Capitalism doesn't run on feelings, Elijah. The meeting ended in failure. But as Eli gathered his things and walked out, he locked eyes with a woman in the room. Rhea Lang, a quiet observer during the meeting, a social impact investor working on launching her own fund. She followed him out. Actually, she said, in some corners of capitalism, feelings can grow, if your intention is clean. She handed him her card. Come have coffee. I'll tell you not what's impossible but what's possible. Rhea Lang became Back-to-back's first investor. A modest amount, $50,000. But more than Elijah's mother had ever made in a year. Her investment brought not only cash but credibility. Within a few months, Eli and Naomi rented an old shoe workshop in South Chicago. The floor was covered in sawdust, windows were broken, shelves wrapped in cobwebs. But when Eli stepped inside, he stopped, put his hands in his pockets and without turning asked, "What do you see in this place?" Naomi smiled. A dirty beginning. Just our kind of place. When the first workshop opened, the neighborhood mostly just watched. Some said, "It's a waste of time." Others asked, "What are you even going to gain from this?" But one day a 13-year-old girl with braided hair walked in. She was holding a worn-out pair of sneakers. "Can you fix these?" she asked. Eli crouched down, took the shoes, examined the sole. It was split. "Yes," he said. "But I won't just give them back to you. I'll show you how to fix them yourself." Her name was Maya. She spent the entire summer in the workshop. Eli thought of her as the first back-to-back graduate. She was like an echo of his own past, someone trying to escape the streets with a single sentence, watching the world but unable to walk through its doors. Within a year, Back-to-back had grown into a small but determined chain. 87 pairs of shoes restored across 3 neighborhoods. Weekly design and skills training with 19 local youth. A microeconomy born within the community. One day, Eli had a phrase painted on the outside wall of the workshop in graffiti. "We fix broken things, especially dreams." But that fall, the first major setback arrived. The building's owner terminated the lease, citing rising property value. Some local investors planned to demolish it and build private condos. Once again, Eli was having his home taken away. He didn't want to consult Whitlow. But one night, Naomi quietly placed a folder on his desk. "I looked into this for you," she said. It was a file. Chicago Urban Enterprise Fund, Community Development Loan. If they met the requirements, they could qualify for a $250,000 low-interest loan. While preparing the application, Eli found himself revisiting his past. This file contained more than numbers. It carried the story of a child once dismissed by the world. A month later, the approval letter arrived. They would finally have a place of their own. At the end of the year, the Chicago Tribune ran a small feature about Elijah Brooks, Southside Shoe Engineer, the project that moves youth from streets to startups. When his mother read it, she couldn't hold back her tears. "You're not just lifting yourself," she said. "You're lifting the whole neighborhood." That year marked a turning point for Elijah Brooks. He was no longer just standing, he was the one helping others stand. And the light leaking through the cracks now looked ready to brighten the whole wall. Chicago, 2016. It was Back-to-Back's third year. By now, it had become recognized across the city. Mentions in municipal newsletters, Eli's story shared on local radio shows. Shoe restoration had become more symbolic than central. The company had evolved into a dynamic model of social good, training youth in micro skills, turning abandoned workshops into community centers. And Elijah Brooks was now the CEO of a real organization. But inside, the cracks were deepening, quietly. Back-to-Back's financial weight was increasing. Its growth rate had begun to outpace its resources. Branches opened in 3 new neighborhoods were still not covering their own costs, and dependency on donations and loans was growing. Naomi saw it clearly. "If we keep going at this pace, we'll either have to slow down or collapse," she said one evening. Eli was resolute. "If we slow down, we lose belief. People see dreams in us. We can't disappoint them." That's when someone new entered their lives. Damian Tull, a Yale graduate, a consultant with impressive pitch skills and powerful connections. They met through Rhea Lang's recommendation. At first, Eli was distant. But Damian's talk, investment strategies, funding rounds, blending social impact with sustainable profit, was enticing. "We can scale Back-to-Back without selling its soul," Damian claimed. And Eli decided to trust him. Guided by Damian, they began talks with a new group of investors. A $1 million series of funding round could make Back-to-Back profitable and allow expansion beyond Chicago. But in return, 30% of the company would need to be handed over. 2 outside members would join the board, and financial operations would be placed under Damian's control. Naomi reacted strongly. "This is our company, its soul is built on transparency and trust. This deal goes against everything we stand for." Eli replied while staring out the office window. "What if we go down with our values?" That week, the deal was signed. And the storm began. For the first 2 months, everything seemed fine. New funding, broader ad campaigns, increased media presence. Then employees noticed late paychecks. Supplier payments were delayed. Training programs were suspended. Naomi laid the documents on Eli's desk. Damian redirected 40% of the fund to consultancy fees. The money left the company. Eli couldn't believe his eyes. When he confronted Damian, he received a calm reply. "This is the nature of scaling. Sometimes we make sacrifices. Sometimes we redefine partnerships." A week later, Naomi resigned. "You've always fought, Eli. But this fight, it's not yours anymore. I can't watch what Back-to-Back is turning into." Eli was left alone in the office. Folders, old newspapers on the wall, the first shoes he ever restored, and Maya's little card that read, "Thank you, Eli." Everything was buried in silence. The phones had stopped ringing. Donors were pulling out. Damian had vanished. Within 3 weeks, 3 Back-to-Back branches closed. The city grant was frozen. Employee severance couldn't be paid. And Elijah Brooks, sitting alone in the office at night, began to read his own story as failure for the first time. That night, he walked back to his mother's house. Chicago's night air cut into his bones. Ruth opened the door. "What happened?" Eli couldn't answer. He just said one sentence. I worked so hard, and it wasn't enough. His mother, in that familiar silence, poured him a cup of tea. You've always been running, Elijah. But sometimes when the storm comes, you have to stop. Wait. Breathe. That night he was silent in the truest sense. No files. No screens. Just a window and the view outside. Southside was still the same. But for the first time he looked at it with a weight in his chest. A week later he noticed a message in an old email inbox. Subject line, update on Maya. And beneath it a short note. Thanks to back-to-back, I got my first college scholarship this year. Now I'll try to repair dreams, not just shoes. Thank you. Maya C. Eli read the email and leaned his arms on the desk. His eyes filled with tears. That moment he understood. Success wasn't always about growth. Sometimes success was standing in the middle of the storm. And sometimes a quiet thank you meant more than $1 million fund. Back-to-back didn't collapse. It shrank. But through the storm, Elijah Brooks redefined who he was. Not a CEO anymore, but a rebuilder. And to rebuild, you must first allow yourself to break. Chicago, 2017. Back-to-back had gotten smaller, but it had survived. Elijah Brooks had learned to speak more slowly, make decisions more carefully, and value trust more than money. Naomi was gone. Damien was now under investigation for fraud. For a few weeks, the media cast suspicion on Eli too, but soon lost interest. Now it was time to build not what stood out but what went deep. His first step was closing the downtown office. Next, he renovated an abandoned library in the heart of the neighborhood, transforming it into a community innovation center. It wasn't just young people who came. Unemployed adults, formerly incarcerated individuals, and unhoused neighbors began showing up too. There were no office desks here. Only workbenches, computer stations, repair corners, and a story room. People didn't just come to gain skills, they came to reclaim dignity. Maya returned as the first mentor. She was now a college student. Eli made her the center director. You see the things I don't, he told her. Maya's answer was simple. Because you gave us light. And we learned to read the shadows. Back-to-back wasn't growing again. This time it was taking root. That same year, one morning, Eli paused at a new email on his phone. From Ria Lang. Subject, I'm recommending you. The message was short but clear. The Social Impact Investment Conference is in Chicago this year. They're looking for a keynote speaker. Your voice deserves to be heard, not just by the neighborhood but by the nation. At first, Eli hesitated. Media, lights, expectations, they reminded him of the storm. But that evening when he saw Maya working late into the night with volunteer mentors, he changed his mind. If I don't speak while they stay silent, that silence might last forever, he said to himself. Chicago Millennium Center. The large hall was full. Under the stage lights, Elijah Brooks wore a suit for the first time, but still had the thin leather bracelet from his childhood on his wrist. He stepped onto the stage, took the microphone. His words weren't just a speech, they were an invitation. I never learned to define success by Harvard degrees, investor lists, or media spotlights. I learned success when a hungry child came home at night and could tell his mother, I learned something today. Back-to-back is not just an organization. Back-to-back is how we turn to people the world abandoned and say, you are still worthy. I'm not here to ask for your investment today. I'm only asking you to raise your hands to the sky. Because change won't come from above. It comes when we look at each other, eye to eye. When he finished, the room was silent. Then a slow applause began. Then a standing ovation. In that moment, it wasn't just Eli on stage. It was Maya, Ruth, Langston, and the hundreds of nameless figures from Southside. After the conference, people who came knocking on Back-to-Back's door weren't investors anymore. They were cities looking for partnership. Detroit, Newark, Baltimore. They all asked, can we have a center too? But Eli set one condition. I won't expand anywhere without local leadership. Ownership must come from within, not from above. This approach was soon labeled in investment circles as the organic ownership model. Harvard Business Review published a feature on Eli titled, Growing by Repair, The Justice Economy Built from Scratch by Elijah Brooks. That fall, an invitation came from Whitlow. The former CEO was retiring. A private dinner was being held to consider who might succeed him. Eli was invited. For the first time in years he stepped back into that building. As the elevator rose to the 32nd floor, he looked at his reflection. This time his shoulders were straight and his eyes calm. Maya was with him. At the end of the dinner, Whitlow raised his glass. There was once a kid in this city. I gave him nothing but a card. And with that card he wrote his own path. Today that same kid stands here inspiring even me. Eli didn't speak. He just bowed his head. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a closing. Whitlow had once opened a window into Eli's world. Now that window had become a door, and it was open for others. That same year the old basketball court in Southside was rebuilt. Finally had a name. Elijah Brooks Neighborhood Innovation Park. At the entrance a small sign read, "Your shoes may be broken. But if your direction is right you can still keep walking." And every Saturday morning Eli would go there, sit with the kids. But he never told them his story. Instead he handed out blank notebooks. So they could write their own. Chicago, 2021. The sky was gray but the wind was gentle. Elijah Brooks stood quietly across the street from his old apartment on 63rd Street, holding a plain coffee in one hand. He wore a dark overcoat. No umbrella. The building's exterior had been renovated. New security bars lined the balconies. But the foundation was the same. Same narrow stairwells. Same basement floor. Maya stood beside him, now a college graduate and director of the community education program. "Do you want to go inside?" she asked. Eli nodded slowly. "Not inside. Just looking is enough." But then he took a quiet step forward. And with the creak of the door time rewound. The basement. That dim place where he once mopped with a rusty bucket. Mr. Stanton was gone. But the smell remained, damp air, cleaning fluid, and the stubborn trace of childhood. Eli knelt and touched the ground. Not the stone but the memory. Eyes closed he whispered, "This is where I first felt shame. And this is where I first dreamed." On the side wall there was a small plaque. The new owners had turned the space into a neighborhood archive. The inscription written by Maya read, "A journey that began in this basement helped shape the future of a city." As Eli stepped out of the building he paused. Across the street, he noticed a young boy walking. Worn shoes. A heavy backpack. Eli couldn't take his eyes off him. Maya gently asked, "Is that you?" Eli replied, "No, he's not me. But I'm just like him." By the end of that year the name Elijah Brooks was no longer just local. It had reached the national stage. Time magazine named him one of the year's leaders of change. But Eli didn't attend any award ceremonies. He released only a written statement. "I am someone who came from thousands like me. If I tell my story I must tell theirs too. Because my success doesn't matter because I stood. It matters because we walked together." In the fall, the mayor of Chicago made a proposal. Honorary urban planning advisor to the city. Eli accepted, with one condition. "Every team I work with must spend 2 full days in the South Side. They'll learn not from papers, but from pavement." The city agreed. And for the first time, bureaucrats stepped out of their offices and into the neighborhoods. By year's end, Back to Back had stopped being just an organization. It had become a movement. It now had centers in 5 U.S. states, hundreds of employees and thousands of participants. But in every center, the same words still hung on the wall. "We fix broken things, especially dreams." When Whitlow and Nash Capital offered Elijah Brooks the CEO position after Whitlow's retirement, his answer was short. "I don't work from above anymore. I work from within." And maybe the greatest transformation was that. To see success not as standing at the top, but lifting others to it, hand in hand. That winter, during the first snowfall in Chicago, Eli returned to the neighborhood. Not for an event, but to leave behind his story. By the old basketball court of his childhood, he had a small bench placed. The inscription read simply, "Sit here. Take a deep breath. Because one day you'll begin your own journey." One morning, Elijah Brooks arrived early at the front steps of the library. No documents in hand. He just stood. He looked toward the sky. A moment where hands no longer reached upward, but shoulders, burdened with the weight of years, had grown stronger. He asked himself, "So what now?" And a quiet voice within replied, "Now they go on." The story of Elijah Brooks didn't end there. But in the silence of the summit, the most meaningful sentence had already been written. A broken child can rebuild a city. as long as even one person believes in them. And sometimes, it's not walking feet, but a believing heart that lights the entire path. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.